I would suggest that principals don't always follow the mold, right? Like 5 years ago, coding was sexy. Then it's entrepreneurship. Then it's robotics. Then it's AI. Like, stop moving for the next marketing piece of your school. Rather than that, look inwards and understand, what do your students want? What do your parents want? What do your teachers want? As simple as making all those three align is the hardest thing in the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another insightful episode of the EdVance Podcast. I'm your host, Vikas Pota. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Devi Sahny, a globally recognized education entrepreneur, author, and thought leader who's challenging traditional ideas of what education should prepare young people for. As the founder and CEO of Ascend Now and The Edge, Devi has built two ventures that have reached more than 500,000 students across 5 continents. Her work focuses on equipping children and young people with the life, leadership, and career skills that are often missing from traditional classrooms, helping them to build confidence, think critically, and navigate an increasingly complex world. Devi, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to the EdVance Podcast. Devi, thank you so much for taking part in our podcast. The entire concept is based around what drives high performance in schools. And as someone who's been around the block a few times, serviced a lot of schools, a lot of students, let's start where we always start on this podcast. In your view, what actually makes a great school?
So it's a great question. To me, what makes a great school is where students figure out who they are. Self-knowledge. I think a lot of schools focus on assessment, and it's so easy to know how a student's going to be doing on their Myers-Briggs or on their IB or on their IGCSE. But what a student would do on a free Saturday afternoon, and having the students figure that out in the school environment, to me, that's what makes a great school. A great school is not just the results, but it's actually like, hey, dear student, if you were to design your own curriculum for 6 months at your school, what would it look like? And a confident student being able to articulate that. And I guarantee you, if we ask this question to, 600 schools, and we ask, 20 students per school, how many of us or how many of them would be able to answer that question? I don't know. So self-discovery, self-knowledge, self-awareness, to me, are the very important developments of skills that would make a really, really good school. I think a great school is one where every child has at least one adult who knows what makes them come alive, what makes them tick. That's a great school to me.
Why do you think we don't have that?
Well, if we did have that, I don't think there would be need for so many tutoring companies, right? If students felt, and if parents felt that students really knew themselves and actually figured out what their strengths were and further cultivated their strengths, personalized education and extracurriculars would be less of a conventional business, no? I don't think we don't have it. I think we should have more of it.
And tell us a little bit about, your journey. You were tutoring your own classmates at Georgetown. You have said that, students avoided the formal group sessions, but sought you out for one-to-ones. Something in that gap made you leave later on your first job at Goldman Sachs and start a business in a country where you knew nobody. What were you seeing in those one-to-one sessions that convinced you there was a viable venture and purpose within it?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to the Devi in Georgetown, the college student. So I was
which was only 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, this is why I love you, Vikas. Which was a while ago, which was 13 years ago. But anyway, so I was, in college, I was a double major in economics and philosophy. I was a decent student. I mean, I really liked school. I really liked going to class. And one day, my economics professor, Fuad Hassanov, who's actually now on the board of my first company, he's like, why don't you be a TA, a teaching assistant? And I said, what does a teaching assistant do? He said, you just mark papers and teach your peers. So I said, okay. And he said, you can also make money. And I was like, okay, sign me up. So I became a TA for his class. And so I basically host these sessions once a week where my peers, so students around my age, could come and, ask questions about the course and matters of clarification. And no one would come because there were a period of 3 or 4 months where no one would come. And after 2 or 3 weeks, one student emailed me and said, hey, Devi, can we meet one-on-one privately, at this coffee shop, which is called Underground in Georgetown's library. So I said, sure. And it wasn't during the TA session, but I said, why not? And so, the week after, another student emailed me, and it just became this thing where so many of my peers wanted the one-on-one time with me. And through that, I learned a lot about how different students acquire knowledge differently. I was tutoring a basketball student who's a basketball player at the Georgetown team, and he would learn different concepts through basketball examples. And so it was kind of cool because while I was teaching, I was actually learning a lot about how knowledge is transferred. And I was up learning how to actually teach others. And so it became a business. So after a couple of students, I was like, hey, let me make this an actual tutoring startup and, see if it could actually work. So I told my professor first, I was like, Professor Fouad, do you mind? Because no one's coming to my TA sessions. Can I make this a kind of organization? He said, no, absolutely, you can. And then we kind of grew. Then I forced my best friend, Navraj. I was like, can you be a tutor too? And, at the time we made quite a lot of money as well. And we were doing well and we were, impacting others and helping others. And a lot of my peers would actually not attend lecture. So they would come to my sessions just to catch up. And I realized, wow, this is a shortcut. This is an opportunity. But also, they're getting the content quicker as opposed to a lecturer just standing in front of 300 students. So that led me to think, okay, well, maybe I have a future in education. So I graduated Georgetown in 2015. And from 2015 to 2018, I joined Goldman Sachs in New York City in investment banking and M&A, where I felt like a bit of a tourist, to be honest. I thought it was the most glamorous job at the time. And a lot of my friends, my mentors were in investment banking. So I did it. And then I said, after 3 years, and I paid off my Georgetown tuition, I said, I need to get back into education. So I looked up, the Finnish system, the US system, and Singapore system. And my 23-year-old brain was like, Singapore? I should start a company there. So I quite literally booked a one-way ticket to Singapore. I called the one person I knew, which was one of my dad's friends who had 3 kids. I said, hey, let me tutor your 3 kids. I'll do it for free. And that just rolled on, and word of mouth. And then COVID happened. And yeah, here we are 8.5 years later.
Tell us about Ascend Now and the scale that you've reached and your achievements and what you've learned in that process.
Ascend Now has always been about figuring out what makes a student tick, taking that and amplifying it 5-fold. Let me give you an example. Last week I was in Beijing and we've started working with a 4-year-old, Theo. We're doing public speaking with him. And he's gotten so confident in just 2 or 3 months. So I was giving a speech in Beijing at a school to 400 students. And I said, well, why don't I ask Theo to give the opening speech? He's only 4. And the speech is to 400 high school students. And he came, confidently crushed it. He didn't even let me give my opening. He just took the mic and started speaking. And that's a good example to explain what Ascend Now is. Age is just a number is something we really believe. I'm not too proud to say that I learn a ton from my 4-year-old students, my 15-year-olds, my 9-year-olds. At Ascend Now, we work with students who could be very academic, who could not be very academic. We work with all types of students, but we personalize the journey to make sure that they have onus and autonomy in what, how, and why they learn. So we have 3 departments. We have an academic department, we have a beyond academic department, and then we have a college support. By far, the beyond academic is the most popular one, where students start their own passion projects, Many students have a lot of podcasts. In fact, I was actually reaching out to one of my students, Surana. I was like, I'm launching a podcast. Can you teach me a thing or two? So learning is really a partnership, Vikas, and it's a resource personally I wish I had when I was growing up. It really started from a personal problem of me being in eighth grade and being so slow academically, being asked to repeat the year, to 4 years later graduating valedictorian of my school because I had one teacher that said to me, I believe in you. And that was enough to carry me through those 4 years. So at Ascend Now, we hope to do that for hundreds of students all over the world. And in the first 4.5 years of Ascend Now, we didn't even pay a single dollar for marketing. I'm very proud to say that Happy Families Talking to Happy Families has really spearhead our growth. And to me, that's the biggest determinant of success because I'm not interested in being a tutoring company for 7 million kids when the kids that we do have are so happy. And I'd rather care in making every one of those kids be super, super happy rather than growing to a certain scale. So that's not me as an entrepreneur.
And Devi, in terms of there are many school principals from around the world and school leaders that actually listen to this EdVance podcast. If you were to, they're probably raising their eyebrows saying that, okay, how do we achieve some of this on our own? And so when they listen to this podcast, what would be your one or two big reflections that they could make the most of to try to provide such personalized support for their children in their classrooms?
I'm not against any schools. Let me preface this by saying I have another business, Edge, that works with schools like Dulwich College, UWC, etc. I think schools do a great job in a lot of ways. If I were to give a principal an advice or a recommendation, firstly, who am I to give that? I work, directly with students, and I also support with skill level software. But if I were really to do that, I would suggest that principals don't always follow the mold, right? Like 5 years ago, coding was sexy. Then it's entrepreneurship. Then it's robotics. Then it's AI. Like, stop moving for the next marketing piece of your school. Rather than that, look inwards and understand, what do your students want? What do your parents want? What do your teachers want? As simple as making all those three align is the hardest thing in the world because the three stakeholders want somewhat different things, right? So I think that's one piece of advice. An example is, speaking to, and I think you introduced me to Dr. Stefan from MISC, right? He doesn't really care what other schools are doing. And the talk that I had with him, it's all about his vision and how he wants to improve and how he talks to his students. The second piece of advice I'd give is, I know this sounds cliche, but incorporate student voices into the learning. Ask them what they want to learn. I'm a big proponent of this. When I created my second business, Edge, we had a board of 13 students. We paid for 1 year to take the modules before we released the product. If it passes the students' happiness test, which is hard to pass, given a lot of them are not that interested in a lot of things right now, it's going to work.
You also have an academic department. So you talked about beyond academic. And so tell me about what are your most requested, products or offers with regards to the academic side of schooling and teaching. What are families and what are young people coming to you for?
So in the academic department, I would say English is our most popular course, whether it's IB English, AP English, IGCSE English. And I have a theory on this, and I don't know if it's the correct theory, but I think a lot of students have started to outsource their thinking and have stopped figuring out how to think clearly, especially from first principles, and therefore can't write clearly or sometimes can't speak clearly. So I think English is one of those subjects that practice, it's a muscle, right? And with AI, it's becoming instantaneous, right? We all use AI. And so I think English is something that is a very, I would say like 60%, I don't know the exact numbers, but 60% of our students do some sort of English program. The way Ascend Now works is you have a mentor that oversees your program. Most students do 4 to 6 programs with us, which is like 2 or 3 academic subjects, 1 beyond academic, and maybe college support. And that mentor oversees the student journey. I'd say the second thing the students and parents come for a lot is many students suffer from anxiety. test prep anxiety, school anxiety, loneliness, and that mentor that oversees the process and journey of the student becomes super integral. That I would say our lifetime value of students is 5 to 7 years. If they start at 10 years old, they're with us at least till 17 years old, 18. So I think the performance coach being a mentor is something a lot of students seek, but they're not seeking because a mentor, like a structured mentor, here's your mentor. No, they're seeking someone who genuinely takes time to listen, is genuinely interested in the student, is genuinely interested in talking about just about anything. And that's why they stay. I mean, maybe they come for academic, but they stay for the mentorship.
And you wrote recently that curricula move in decades while AI moves in weeks. And you asked your network what they would include in a school being built today. I want to put that back to you because adding is the easy part. Like, if you were designing that school tomorrow, what would you take off the timetable together? And who would you fight hardest on it?
So firstly, I think there's a huge contradiction with AI right now happening, where many schools are telling students, don't use AI for your homework. Don't use AI for your English. Don't use AI. And then when students are starting to prep for college and for job and workforce, they're realizing knowing AI is not an option, it's a necessity, right? So there's a bit of that contradiction. The second contradiction I think I see, maybe not contradiction, but observation, is that let's say I'm a student and I'm Vikas and I use AI to do my homework. I'm Devi, I'm Vikas's teacher. I use AI to grade Vikas's homework and give feedback. Vikas takes back AI and fixes all the homework and back and forth, right? So I think those are sort of the two big issues, right? How I would solve that personally is, and I keep going back to this, is skill level learning is becoming very, very tangential to what a school does. Do schools teach networking? How about we take a class and we put 7 Vikases in front of 2 students? How cool would that be for the students, right? How do they speak? Cross-generational dialogue, learning what grit is, resilience, learning entrepreneurship. I think a lot of students like practical learning, and they like to connect that to what they want to eventually do. So if I was a school, I would not say, hey, I don't have 15 minutes to do pastoral care and social emotional learning. I would actually do 5 hours of that. We just signed a school in Singapore that's actually reflipping the script, and they're doing much more skill level learning, and they're doing much less academic learning. I think some schools are moving towards that. But the reason I asked my community that is because I want to get their ideas. I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know if they're not in education, what are they thinking? So I think being in education, you're kind of in a bubble and you're thinking from a certain lens. But talk to, I don't know, a CEO of a unicorn company that dropped out of high school. What does he say about it?
Devi, I'm really inspired with what you said. And one of the things that I've already taken note of in this podcast interview is how learner focused you actually are. And you may not be aware of this, but we launched something called the Global Youth Council a couple of weeks ago. We want to build a cohort of 100 prolific young people from around the world. And one of the reasons I want to do so actually is because, yes, of course, the future belongs to them, but we also want to hear what they're thinking, how they think about the world, how they want to engage with it. And so I ask you that question because you spend a lot of time with students directly. And you have also said that you meet every one of yours at least once a year. What are you seeing in young people now that you were not seeing maybe 3 or 4 years ago? And what are we still teaching as though nothing has changed?
Today's young people are more connected than ever before. And yet, our world has never been more divided. The future needs a different kind of leader. Introducing the Global Youth Council, a global fellowship for exceptional 16 to 18-year-olds from every continent and every discipline, bringing together young people from around the world to develop leadership, global citizenship, future readiness, and public impact through expert-led conversations, peer circles, real-world engagement, and a flagship summit experience. Global platform for young people who are ready to step forward, think bigger, and lead with purpose. Because the future will be built by those who know how to connect, collaborate, and lead across differences. Global Youth Council, growing the leaders we need for tomorrow, today.
It's a great question. And it's the reason that I try to meet the students directly so I can understand and hear them and see what they're saying. I think students now are a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more cautious, a little bit less confident in their next step, in what makes them tick. You ask 10 students in front of you, what's your passion? 1 or 2 students will have the answer, maximum. I can guarantee you, even if it's a top school, right? And fine, did we know what our passion was? Probably not, but we had some inkling and idea of what made us tick. So what I'm seeing is at the younger age group, at the 4 to 8-year-old age group, students are much more malleable, open, creative, more excited about what makes them tick. I think between 9 to 15, 9 to 16, social pressures, anxiety, mental health, coined terms that don't mean anything to me personally, like ADHD or dyslexia, becoming an obstacle in their own confidence building and their own character building. I think it's a tough time to be a student. I really do. I don't know about you, Vic, but I didn't grow up with Instagram. I didn't grow up with Facebook, we had MSN, which is like the chat, right? But there's so much noise, and there's so much contamination of thoughts. We live in a society where propaganda is everywhere, not just for adults that maybe know how to deal with it a bit more, but for kids. Right? I was doing the podcast with one of my friends who's the director of the World Health Organization. And it's slightly off topic, but slightly on topic. And I was talking to him about, what skills are necessary for kids, right? So between, 5 years old to 15. And he said that he was sued by a tobacco company and a vaping company because they market their vapes to that age group. I don't know if you know this, but they've designed like pencil case looking vapes so you can take them into school and easily use them. Or like pencils that look exactly like pencils and it's actually a vape, right? So if we live in that world where marketing is so easy and so conducive to that age group, is it a surprise that most kids don't know who they are? I don't think so. So I think that there's a lot of movement and a lot of noise, and students now have to learn, how do I uncontaminate my brain and figure out what's really for me, because students get influenced easily. I was just on with a student, she's 14 years old at Singapore American School. And I said, why don't you start a company in this? She's not interested in that topic, but she immediately said yes, because I asked her, but she's not genuinely interested, right? So there are a lot of, I think, gaps that we need to try to solve. But I think the first thing comes with, and I don't really put my foot down on this, is that students need to find a mentor. And that's the hardest thing, because you can't go up to a teacher and say, hey, can you mentor me? It's a choice by the mentor and it's a choice by the mentee.
Thank you for that, Devi. I really appreciate your response on young people and what they're thinking and how they're behaving today. School leaders tell me that often what it is that parents are one of the hardest parts of the equation of the job. You've spent years directly working with parents, and which is a very different relationship. What do schools most often get wrong about parents? And what have you learned about telling a parent something they do not want to hear?
Great question. Schools think parents often want to meddle unnecessarily in their child's journey and only care about grades. I think most parents want to get visibility into what's happening in the school beyond academics. What skills are developing? What's happening in AI? What universities are visiting the school, right? I was just on with a parent from Saudi Arabia, and she was like, her kids go to MISC, and she said, well, why can't you bring Georgetown and 6 other universities to the school? So I think parents actually want to be partners with schools in their child's learning, as opposed to be the decision makers or the judgment the people that are making judgment decisions, I think they just want to be involved in more things. Not every parent, right? Some parents have, very busy lives and they don't have time for that. But I think most parents just want to be heard, just want to feel that feeling of, oh, the school is actually listening to me. And parents are a tough customer. So I always look at the schools we work with and I'm like, that's really hard, right? Because parents want different things and things like that. But ultimately, they just want the school to say, hey, parent, I really care what you have to say. And I really want to hear you. And I want to see what your thoughts are. And I want to use some of those thoughts to improve the school. Partners.
That's a great message. Thank you. And you recently also gave a TED Talk. Why don't you tell our listeners about it?
Yeah, it was actually not recent. It was in 2021, so 5 years ago. I had given it right when I had started Ascend, so maybe 3 years into Ascend. I remember I was so nervous because I hadn't eaten the whole morning because I was super nervous to give it. But the TED Talk was about autonomy and giving students back the power, giving them the voice. And I still stand by this today. In fact, at Ascend now, for any program that you do, the students have to sign a contract saying, I, Vikas, have signed to this program because I really want to do it. So we don't have parents sign up to the program directly. We always speak to the student first. And my TED Talk was about that. My TED Talk was about my journey. I shared some examples of students who were figuring out their thing, their passion, and taking a problem within their own lives and applying that to the real world. So I share an example of a student, Portia, who I met when she was in 8th grade. And she came to me and she said, I'm okay at school, but I don't know what my thing is. I don't know what I stand for. My parents are super successful, but what is my thing? And she said, Devi, why don't I, apply for an internship? Back then, you couldn't get many internships for high school students. So I said, Portia, why don't you start a company to provide high school students internships? She did that. It's called Intern Ed. It's still running today. Her brother took it over and now someone else took it over. And she provides high school students in Indonesia 1 week, 2 week online internships. So my talk was largely about that. And I'm actually giving another one next year. So I'm looking forward to redeeming my experience a little bit. But largely about student voices.
Devi, following on from that, that this podcast is really about how do leaders drive high performance. Our belief is that we need stronger schools, we need better schools, we need more high performing schools. And so, in your entrepreneurial career, what are the 3 lessons you've learned about how you drive high performance, whether it's through your voluntary activities, through your own entrepreneurial ventures, or with the organizations that you work with and the people that you've met? What are the top 3 lessons for high performance that our audience can take back to their schools tomorrow?
I would say the first is depth before breadth. So protect your depth. So focus, whatever you're trying to do, if it's a coding program, robotics program, entrepreneurship, or just plain academic excellence, focus. I think schools get distracted by the next thing, sometimes for marketing purposes, sometimes because parents ask, sometimes because students ask. But I would say having a clear focus and giving it time is really, really important. The second thing I would say is I read this quote, the purest generosity you can give someone is your attention. And I think that's true. Your attention, especially from a student standpoint, is not guaranteed. And I think a lot of teachers assume that if I teach Pythagoras' theorem in this way, I'm definitely going to get my students' attention. It's actually the hardest thing to get in the world these days, is a student super invested, super excited, super attentive, because they've grown up in such a distracted, noise-filled society. So if I could install one habit in every school, it's see the person, understand your learner, be super, super learner focused. Even have a class where students teach teachers. Why not? Flip the script. As I said to you earlier, I learn from everyone, especially the young people, right? The third thing I would say is skills are really important. And so if you say to me, I only have 10 minutes to teach skills, then you may not have students that maybe after they get great grades, but they may not know themselves. So understanding what a student stands for, what makes them tick, can, in my view, mainly be studied through skills and extracurriculars, right? So I think those are the three things I would say.
And Devi, you've built a series of different organizations and ventures. Let's talk a little bit about culture, because it's the thing that every leader says they want, but very few can describe. You have built a team culture, from what I understand, without a building to hold it together. And you spend your days with students who often come to you precisely because they've felt unseen at school. So you hear both halves of this. What advice would you give a head teacher who wants their school to be a place where teachers and students genuinely feel safe, seen, and heard? And what should they start doing from Monday morning?
It's so interesting you say that, because for me, building a culture has been the hardest thing in my entrepreneurship journey. You can hire people from all parts of the world without meeting them, seeing them on Zoom, and then instantly assessing and making a judgment call on culture. That being said, I am quite happy that the Send Now culture is a very we culture. If I mess up, we mess up. If you mess up, we mess up. It's always the same. It's always a we. We're a team. And I think in the last 8 years, I've seen less than 5 kind of altercations and kind of dialogues. And I'm really happy for that, Vic, because I think it's really, really tough to find and build a good culture. And I think it starts with the CEO, but it gets lived through every colleague, and it's in partnership. You hear what your colleagues want. One of my colleagues, told me I'd like to work from a beach in Bali, and I'd like to work Saturday and Sunday, and I'd like to skip Monday and Tuesday. And that's okay, right? Because if you're working, I don't care, right? So what's something that schools can do on Monday morning? I feel like a culture is also a partnership. It's not one person deciding what the culture is and here are the 3 flashy values. It gets lived in practice, and it gets lived through students, it gets lived through teachers, it gets lived through principals. I think having more sessions where all of them learn from each other rather than having teachers teach students all the time could be really powerful. Like I said, students teaching teachers or students teaching principals. I think that could be a really cool, like, end of semester course or end of semester presentation. So it's the hardest thing to do in the world. For us, we have a couple of rules, like age is just a number, strive for excellence, serve others before you do. Those are the 3 kind of, pillars of the company, and that's how we've lived through the culture of Ascend Now. And I would say, Vic, I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I had to fire someone, and he was a great employee, but he could sort of stood his time, and he was ready for that next step. And so before I fired him, I called a school in Singapore and I said, hey, I have a great colleague, I think you should hire him. And they already had the job ready for him when I fired him. And so I fired him and I said, hey, by the way, I have a school that's really keen to meet you, and I think they're going to hire you. Meet them. If they don't hire you, I'll, help you find something else. And that's not my responsibility. If I fire someone, I just let them go. But that's the culture of Ascend Now, right? And similarly, a couple of years ago, we had a colleague who had to leave due to her mom was sick. And so immediately when she left, she already had someone ready to go to replace her, who's now been with us for like 5 years. So it's hard to explain. It's hard to put in words, but especially since we work remotely. Doing one time a year retreats, nothing like it. The family that it is. I always cry during our retreats, which I don't cry much, but I always shed a tear and have to put myself back together because I realize these are people that I just really want to spend my weekends with. I really want to spend the week with. I enjoy spending time with them. That's how I try to build it. Always room for improvement, but that's how I've tried to do it.
Devi, you've been a star on this podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. As far as I understood what you said, There are plenty of ideas that people can take away from this episode, but the three lessons that on high performance that you mentioned and really stood out for me were to focus on depth before breadth. And the point you're making is to focus, don't just change with the trend or the latest snazzy thing. Be committed to a course and stick to it. The second was the quote that you used was very powerful, I thought, which was the purest generosity you ever give is your attention. And your point there is quite simply be more learner-centric and more student-centric and give them everything you can. And the biggest thing you can give them is your full attention, which I think is a very powerful message. And the third lesson for high performance you talked about was that skills are really, really important, and these extracurricular offers is often what shapes a young person. And every school should think about how they impart skills. Devi Sahny, thank you so much for taking part in today's podcast and for sharing your story and insights with us. Friends, if you found this episode useful, please subscribe, share, and follow the EdVance Podcast for future episodes. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you and goodbye.